The violet sunrise of La Maria painted the crystalline forest in shades of amethyst and rose, as Raina Blackwood adjusted her atmospheric suit sensors. The exobiologist hadn't expected to find signs of intelligent life on this remote planet, but the readings were unmistakable. Through the dense canopy of translucent trees, she caught glimpses of structures that couldn't have been formed naturally, delicate spires that seemed to grow from the ground like flowers made of living stone. Raina's heart raced as she documented her findings. After 15 years of studying distant worlds, she might have finally discovered something extraordinary. Her comm unit chirped with an incoming message from the research vessel orbiting above, but she silently dismissed it. Nothing would interrupt this moment. As she pushed through a cluster of chiming crystal fronds, Raina froze. Before her stood a clearing unlike anything in human experience. The structures she'd glimpsed earlier revealed themselves as an entire settlement, but one that seemed to pulse with its own life. Homes spiraled up from the ground in organic curves, their surfaces shifting colors like the wings of butterflies. But it was the inhabitants that took her breath away. The Vesperi, as she would later learn to call them, moved through their village with an otherworldly grace. Their tall, willowy forms sparkled with bioluminescence that rippled across their skin in patterns that seemed to speak without words. But most remarkable was what surrounded them, creatures of all sizes and forms, from tiny floating orbs of light to massive, six-legged beings that resembled Earth's extinct megafauna. These animals didn't just coexist with the Vesperi, they communicated with them. Raina watched in amazement as a young Vesperi child reached out to touch a creature that looked like a cross between a deer and a bird. The animal's iridescent feathers rippled in response, and both beings' bioluminescent patterns synchronized in a dance of light and meaning. The beauty of the moment shattered as her suit's environmental alerts began to flash red. The atmospheric readings were troubling, increasing levels of toxic compounds in the upper atmosphere, far beyond what her preliminary scans had indicated. Whatever paradise she discovered was in danger. Movement caught her eye. A Vesperi elder had noticed her presence, their tall form radiating patterns of light that somehow conveyed both welcome and concern. Behind them, a group of the deer-bird creatures huddled close, their feathers dimmed with what Raina could only interpret as fear. The elder approached, raising a hand in what seemed to be a universal gesture of peace. Their skin flickered with patterns that Raina's translator couldn't begin to decipher, but their eyes held an intelligence and wisdom that transcended the need for words. Raina slowly removed her helmet, her instruments confirming the air was safe to breathe. The scent of crystal flowers and something like honey filled her lungs. "I'm Raina," she said softly, touching her chest. "I'm here to help." The elder's patterns shifted to a soft, pulsing blue. They gestured to the sky, then to the animals around them, their movements telling a story that needed no translation. Their world was changing, and not for the better. The animals knew it, the Vesperi knew it, and now Raina knew it too. As she stood there, watching the interplay of light and life around her, Raina understood that she'd stumbled upon more than just a discovery. She'd found a mission. These people, with their extraordinary connection to the natural world, were facing an environmental catastrophe that could destroy not just their way of life, but the delicate balance of an entire ecosystem. The elder led her toward the village, where more Vesperi gathered, their patterns creating a symphony of light that seemed to welcome her while simultaneously expressing their deep concern. Each was accompanied by different creatures, some airborne, some terrestrial, all displaying a level of intelligence and cooperation that defied conventional xenobiological understanding. As the violet sun began to set, casting long shadows through the crystal forest, Raina activated her comm unit. She had to choose her words carefully. What she'd found here would change everything: humanity's understanding of alien life, of consciousness, of the very nature of communication itself. But more importantly, she had to find a way to save it. "Base command," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I'm reporting a Class 1 discovery. And we don't have much time." 3 weeks had passed since Raina's first contact with the Vesperi, and each day brought new wonders and mounting concerns. She'd learned that the tribal leader's name was Thela, a sound accompanied by a cascade of silver-blue light patterns that reminded her of falling stars. The relationship between them had grown from cautious observation to genuine collaboration, though the shadow of Lemuria's deteriorating atmosphere loomed over every interaction. Today, they stood at the edge of what Reyna had come to think of as the communion fields, watching as Vesperi children learned their people's most precious gift. A young girl named Lyra sat perfectly still as a flock of crystal-winged creatures, similar to Earth's butterflies but spanning the size of dinner plates, danced around her. Her skin flickered with uncertain patterns until suddenly, gloriously, the creature's wings began to pulse in perfect synchronization with her lights. The binding comes earlier to her than most, Thela communicated through a combination of light patterns and gestures that Reyna's neural translator was slowly learning to interpret. But it may be one of the last bindings we witness on Lemuria. The words sent a chill through Reyna's spine. Her atmospheric readings grew worse by the day. The crystal forests that once sang in the wind were becoming brittle, and the animals were showing signs of distress that even she could read. The Vesperi's gift, their ability to communicate with and understand the planet's fauna, had become both a blessing and a curse. They felt the animals' fear as if it were their own. "The Council of Sciences has reviewed my data," Reyna replied, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the crystalline pendant Thela had given her, a symbol of trust between their peoples. "They're sending a research team. We'll find a way to stabilize the atmosphere." Thela's patterns shifted to a deep purple that Reyna had learned to associate with skepticism. "Your people's ways are not always gentle, Reyna Blackwood. We have seen your great ships in the sky, heard tales of worlds changed by human touch. This will be different," Reyna insisted, then paused as a massive shadow passed overhead. One of Lemuria's largest native species, a creature the Vesperi called an air whale, descended nearby. Its skin rippled with patterns similar to the Vesperi's own, and Reyna watched in amazement as Thela's lights responded, engaging in a complex dialogue she could only begin to comprehend. The air whale's message was clear enough from Thela's reaction. More of the great creatures were falling ill, their migration patterns disrupted by the changing atmospheric conditions. The Vesperi's animal companions weren't just suffering, they were dying. That evening, as Lemuria's violet sun set, Reyna found herself in the heart of the Vesperi village for an unprecedented gathering. The Council of Elders had convened, their combined light patterns creating a mesmerizing display that turned the crystal structures around them into prisms of living color. But beneath the beauty lay purpose, they were voting on whether to accept human intervention. Reyna stood before them, trying to convey confidence she didn't entirely feel. "The atmospheric degradation is accelerating," she explained, her words translated by both technology and Thela's patient interpretation. "But we've identified the cause. A chain reaction in the upper atmosphere, triggered by changes in Lemuria's magnetic field. We can stop it, but we'll need to establish research stations. Work closely with your people. Learn from your connection to this world's creatures." The debate that followed was like watching silent lightning, arguments and counterarguments played out in complex patterns of light. Some elders feared change, others feared stagnation. Through it all, Reyna noticed something extraordinary. The animals of Lemuria had gathered around the village, from the smallest flying creatures to the massive air whales above. All of them pulsing with their own lights, all of them somehow part of this crucial decision. Finally, the eldest of the council, a being whose light patterns had faded to gentle pastels with age, raised their hands. The decision was made. The Vesperi would work with humans to save their world, but with conditions. Their ways would be respected. Their connection to Lemuria's creatures would guide the research. And Reyna would serve as the bridge between their peoples. As the gathering dispersed, Thela approached Reyna. Their patterns had shifted to a color she'd never seen before, a deep, resonant gold that seemed to carry both hope and trepidation. "Our paths are now one," Thela said, the translator struggling to capture the complexity of their light speech. But you must understand, Rayna Blackwood. If we fail, it is not just the Vesperi who will suffer. Every creature you see, from the smallest to the greatest, is bound to us. Their fate is our fate. Rayna looked up at the darkening sky, where the air whales still circled, their patterns a chorus of concern and hope. Then we won't fail, she promised, knowing as she said it that she was committing herself to something far greater than a scientific mission. This was about preservation not just of a species or an ecosystem, but of a way of being that humanity had never imagined possible. The real work would begin tomorrow. For now, she stood with Thela, watching as Lemuria's twin moons rose, casting their light through the crystal forest and creating a symphony of color that, just for a moment, made her believe anything was possible. The research station's warning sirens pierced the crystalline dawn, their harsh sound alien against Lemuria's natural symphony. Rayna burst from her quarters, tablet in hand, heart pounding. The atmospheric readings had spiked overnight, far beyond their worst projections. Dr. Blackwood. Her assistant, June Park, rushed toward her, his dark eyes wide with concern. The degradation rate has doubled. The air whales, they're falling. Through the station's transparent walls, Rayna watched in horror as one of the massive creatures descended erratically, its bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly. A group of Vesperi had already gathered below, their combined light patterns creating a stabilizing beacon for the distressed animal. "Where's Thela?" Rayna demanded, already moving toward the airlock. "At the sacred grounds," June replied, keeping pace. "They've discovered something in the ancient caves. Something that's interfering with our atmospheric stabilization attempts." The sacred grounds lay beneath the oldest crystal formations, a network of caves that the Vesperi had long considered the birthplace of their connection with Lemuria's creatures. Until now, they had forbidden human access. That Thela had gone there meant the situation was even worse than Rayna feared. She found the Vesperi leader deep within the cave system, surrounded by patterns of light unlike any Rayna had seen before. They weren't coming from the Vesperi or their animal companions, but from the cave walls themselves, ancient technology, dormant for millennia. The first ones, Thela's patterns rippled with awe and fear. They were not gods as our stories tell, but beings who came before. They built this. They gestured to a crystalline structure that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, complex patterns flowing through its latticed surface. Rayna's scanners went wild. The energy signatures matched the atmospheric disturbances perfectly. "It's a terraforming engine," she breathed. "The first ones must have used it to make Lemuria habitable. But something's wrong, it's malfunctioning, reversing the process." Understanding passed between them like a current. The very technology that had made Lemuria a paradise was now threatening to destroy it. But the Vesperi's gift, their ability to communicate through light and pattern, wasn't just a biological quirk. It was an inheritance, meant to maintain the ancient machines that kept their world alive. The next days became a blur of desperate work. While Rayna and her team worked to understand the first one's technology, the Vesperi gathered their animal companions in vast numbers. The air whales sang their songs of distress, crystal-winged butterflies carried messages through the deteriorating atmosphere, and ground-dwelling creatures felt the planet's growing fever through their very bones. But progress came at a cost. The more they learned about the ancient technology, the more it became clear that saving Lemuria would require a sacrifice. The terraforming engine couldn't be simply shut down, its energy had to be redirected, channeled through living conduits who could speak its language of light. The pattern speakers must join with the machine, Elder Voss, the oldest of the Vesperi Council, explained through a complex dance of light. But the joining, it changes those who attempt it. Many of our ancestors gave their corporeal forms to maintain the balance. Thela's patterns shifted to deep crimson, determination tinged with fear. "I will do it." "No," Rayna interjected, years of studying the Vesperi's light language allowing her to express her own patterns through the crystalline pendant she wore. We do it together. Human science, Vesperi wisdom, and the First One's technology. The pattern must be complete. The plan they devised was both brilliant and terrifying. Using modified versions of their atmospheric suits, Reyna's team would help channel and stabilize the energy flow. The Vesperi would communicate with Lemuria's creatures, coordinating a planet-wide network of living conductors to help distribute the load. And at the center, Thela and Reyna would attempt something unprecedented, a joining of human consciousness with Vesperi light speech to interface directly with the ancient machine. As they made their preparations, a massive storm gathered above the crystal forest. The air itself seemed to be tearing apart, the once beautiful auroras now toxic swirls of chemical destruction. Time was running out. If this fails, Thela's patterns pulsed with the closest approximation to a whisper Reyna had ever seen in their light speech, "My people's gift may die with us." Reyna touched her hand to Thela's, watching as their combined bioluminescence created new patterns, neither human nor Vesperi, but something entirely new. "Then we make sure it doesn't fail," she replied. "Your people's gift isn't just about talking to animals, Thela. It's about understanding that all living things are connected. And today, we prove that connection extends even to humans." Above them, the air whales began to sing, their haunting calls echoing through the crystal caves. The time had come to either save Lemuria or watch it die trying. The storm raged above the crystal forest, turning Lemuria's violet sky into a maelstrom of caustic clouds and lightning. Inside the ancient cave system, Reyna checked her modified environment suit one final time. The crystalline circuitry that June and his team had integrated into it pulsed with a soft light, ready to channel the terraforming engine's enormous energy. Around her, thousands of creatures had gathered, drawn by the Vesperi's call. Air whales hovered near the cave mouths, their massive bodies creating windbreaks against the storm. Crystal-winged butterflies formed living constellations throughout the caverns, their patterns synchronizing with the Vesperi's light speech. Even the most reclusive of Lemuria's fauna had emerged from their hiding places, understanding that their world's fate hung in the balance. "The binding circles are ready," June reported, his voice tight with tension. He gestured to the concentric rings of modified sensors and crystal formations they'd arranged around the ancient machine. "But the atmospheric degradation is accelerating. We have maybe an hour before the damage becomes irreversible." Thela approached, their light patterns rippling with a complexity of emotion that even years of study couldn't fully decode. They wore an adaptation of Reyna's suit design, human technology merged with Vesperi bioluminescence in a way that spoke to everything they were trying to achieve. "The First Ones left us more than just their machines," Thela said, their patterns creating shadows that danced across the cave walls. "They left us a choice. To remain as we are and watch our world die, or to evolve and help it live." Elder Voss stepped forward, their ancient patterns barely visible in the growing darkness. "In every generation, there are those who must sacrifice to maintain the balance. The First Ones understood this. It is why they gave us their gift, their light speech." The Elder's patterns shifted to a deep, resonant blue. "But never before has a human stood ready to make this sacrifice with us." Reyna felt the weight of history in that statement. The modified suits might protect them from the worst of the energy transfer, but interfacing with the terraforming engine would change them forever. The human and Vesperi scientists had theorized that the process would alter their neural patterns, their very consciousness. They would survive, but as something neither fully human nor fully Vesperi. A deafening crack echoed through the caves as another section of the crystal forest shattered above them. The time for contemplation was over. "Begin the sequence," Reyna commanded, taking her position at one point of the binding circle. Thela stood opposite her, their patterns aligning with the ancient machine's pulsing core. Around them, the Vesperi arranged themselves in a complex geometric pattern, their combined light speech creating pathways for the energy to flow. June initiated the power transfer, and Reyna's world exploded into light. The terraforming engine roared to life, its energy surging through the modified suits and into their bodies. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced coursed through her nervous system as her consciousness expanded, connecting with Thila's across the circle. Through their merged awareness, Reyna finally understood the true magnitude of the Vespery's gift. She could feel every creature in the caves, every air whale and crystal butterfly, every burrowing beast and floating light spore. More than that, she could feel Lamaria itself, a living entity maintained by the delicate balance of technology and nature that the first ones had established. The malfunctioning terraforming engine had disrupted that balance, but now they could restore it. Together, human and Vespery, they began to redirect its energy. The air whales sang in harmony with the machine's frequencies, their songs helping to stabilize the atmospheric fluctuations. Swarms of smaller creatures carried the reformed energy patterns throughout the cave system and up into the storm-ravaged sky. But something was wrong. The energy wasn't dispersing properly. The patterns weren't holding. "The neural load is too high," June shouted over the rising whine of overtaxed equipment. "The suits can't handle it." Reyna felt Thila's consciousness brush against hers, their thoughts merging into a single understanding. The suits weren't the answer, they were the problem. The first ones hadn't used technology to channel their energy, they had become one with it. In perfect synchronization, Reyna and Thila reached up and removed their helmets. Raw energy flooded their bodies, transforming them at the cellular level. Reyna watched in awe as her skin began to emit patterns of light that matched Thila's, while Thila's form took on a more solid, almost human appearance. Around them, the other Vespery gasped in their own way, their patterns flickering with wonder as the two beings at the center of the binding circle became something entirely new. Through their combined consciousness, they reached into the heart of the terraforming engine. They found its broken rhythms and corrupted patterns, and with their new understanding, they began to heal them. The storm above started to calm. The caustic clouds began to disperse. The crystal forest stopped its decay, new growth already spreading from the regenerating matrix. As consciousness began to fade, Reyna felt Thila's presence in her mind, their thoughts inseparable from her own. They had succeeded, but the price had been exactly as promised. They were changed, transformed into living bridges between human and Vespery, between technology and nature, between past and future. The last thing Reyna saw before darkness took her was the cave filled with patterns of light, not just from the Vespery, but from every creature present, all of them connected in a web of communication and consciousness that had just grown to include humanity itself. One full cycle of Lamaria's twin moons had passed since the day of transformation. The crystal forest had not only recovered but flourished, spreading across the restored landscape in patterns more complex and beautiful than ever before. The air whales soared through clear skies, their songs carrying new harmonies that spoke of change and rebirth. In the heart of the Vespery village, a structure unlike any other had taken root. Neither purely human architecture nor traditional Vespery design, it grew from the ground like a spiral of light and crystal, serving as both a scientific research center and a sacred space for interspecies communion. Here, Reyna and Thila, now something more than either human or Vespery, taught others to bridge the gap between worlds. June Park stood at the entrance of this new structure, still amazed by how his former mentor had changed. Reyna's skin now shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that flowed like liquid starlight, while her eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed to span millennia. Beside her, Thila had also transformed, their once ethereal form now carrying traces of human solidity while maintaining the elegant grace of the Vespery. "The neural patterns are stable," June reported, reviewing data on his tablet. "The modifications to the terraforming engine are holding. Lamaria isn't just surviving, it's evolving." Reyna's response came in both words and light patterns, a new form of communication that merged human language with Vespery expression. "The first ones didn't fail," she said, her patterns creating shapes that added layers of meaning to her words. They didn't disappear. They transformed, just as we have, becoming part of the very system they created to preserve life here. Through the structure's crystal walls, they could see groups of human scientists working alongside Vesperi teachers. Young Vesperi children played with human kids, their natural bioluminescence inspiring subtle changes in their human playmates. Already, the human children were beginning to show signs of developing their own light patterns, faint, but unmistakable. The gift was never meant to belong to just one species, Thela added, their patterns interweaving with Reyna's in a dance of shared consciousness. The first ones seeded it in the Vesperi, knowing that one day we would need to share it with others to ensure Lemuria's survival. Elder Voss, who had become a bridge between the old ways and the new, approached with a group of air whales floating serenely above. The massive creatures now served as living transmitters, helping to maintain the restored atmospheric balance while carrying messages between scattered communities across the planet. The Council of Earth has approved the establishment of the first human Vesperi Academy, the Elder announced, their patterns showing pride and hope. More will come to learn, to change, to grow. The transformation you began will continue. Reyna and Thela moved to the structure's highest point, where a chamber of living crystal offered a view of the entire valley. Below, human buildings had begun to merge with Vesperi architecture, creating spaces that honored both cultures while crafting something entirely new. Research stations monitored the health of the planet while doubling as communion points for the vast network of creature consciousness that now spanned Lemuria. We feared change, Thela mused, their patterns reflecting the golden light of sunset. Both our peoples did. Humans feared losing their identity, while the Vesperi feared losing their traditions. Instead, we found something greater than ourselves, Reyna finished, reaching out to touch a crystal butterfly that had landed nearby. Through their shared awareness, she could feel its contentment, its joy in the renewed vitality of their world. Not an ending of who we were, but an evolution into who we could become. As night fell, the valley came alive with light, bioluminescent patterns from the Vesperi, subtle glows from the gradually adapting humans, the ancient pulse of the terraforming engine now working in harmony with the planet's natural rhythms, and the countless points of living light from Lemuria's native creatures. All of them connected, all of them communicating in a symphony of consciousness that transcended traditional boundaries. The air whales began their evening song, their music carrying through the crystal forests and up to the stars. Human children laughed as they tried to mimic Vesperi light patterns, while Vesperi youth excitedly learned Earth languages. Scientists and shamans shared knowledge freely, each tradition enriching the other. And at the heart of it all, Reyna and Thela stood as living proof that the greatest achievements come not from clinging to what is known, but from being brave enough to embrace transformation. The story of our peoples will be told in patterns of light, Thela said, their shared consciousness reaching out to touch the vast web of life that pulsed through Lemuria. And in the language of stardust, Reyna added, her patterns merging with Thela's as they gazed up at the infinite possibilities that stretched before them, written across the endless sky. Above them, Lemuria's twin moons cast their light through the crystal forest, creating cascades of color that spoke of hope, of change, and of a future where the boundaries between species fade before the simple truth that all life, no matter its form, shares in the same great dance of existence.